Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies, wherever you are in the world. How's everyone doing?
Good morning. Very well.
Yes, awesome, awesome. So again, the theme for this particular panel, this first panel, it's how to respond to physical and mental crisis. So we've had an opportunity to uh, hear from Leslie earlier today, and she spoke a little bit on this particular topic. And I know that she is going to expound on what she spoke about earlier today. But I think let's start with Bimpe. Bimpe, I'm going to give you just some time, just to kind of discuss the topic and give your insights on the topic that we have for us today.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And I also like to thank the leadership of ITWLA for this opportunity. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to our distinguished panelists and also to participants from different parts of the world. I hope you can see my slides, please.
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, so the topic for our discuss during this panel session is how to respond to physical and mental crisis. And I'd like to start by putting some characteristics of a crisis. I mean, I'm going to take my introductory remarks from a very personal point of view. Crises for me are unwanted, unexpected, difficult events or occurrences that lead to major disruption in our lives. I say this because I have been through a variety of crises in my very short life, ranging from health crisis, loss and grief, to loss of job, to financial crisis, to having to take care of very sick children or a child, and so on and so forth. None of these experiences have been wanted. All of these experiences have been difficult. However, over the years, I've come to realize that just like I think my brother JD had mentioned earlier on, there are opportunities in crisis. And over the years, my perspective and my attitude towards crisis has changed significantly. First and foremost, when a crisis occurs in my life, I sit up and I see it as it's time for another examination. Before you get promoted to a next class, you have to sit down and write an exam that shows that you have what it takes to be promoted. So each time something is going wrong or something is happening, I say to myself, okay, you're about to start another examination, and I hope you pass this examination. Crises indeed have helped me tremendously to grow, to develop. I've come to see them as opportunities to equip myself, to equip other people. What do I mean by that? I've lost my dad, that means the world to me. That experience is supposed to be stored in my toolbox to be used to equip and support somebody else in the future that's going to be experiencing loss and grief. So it's not all bad. That's the major thing that has helped me to cope significantly with crisis over the years. And I have found out that the effects of crisis on me, still not pleasurable, but the effects have not been as devastating as they used to be. So how do we manage and respond to crisis? There are a few things I do personally to respond to crisis situations, whether it's physical or mental health, that can result to physical or mental health problems. The first is I tell myself that I must manage this crisis in a way that I curtail and reduce the potential damage and impact from that crisis. So the deed has been done. A surgery has gone wrong. My husband's surgery has gone wrong. But my thinking is, hey, it shouldn't get worse. This should not result to anything. What can I do right now in the middle of this problem, in the middle of this financial crisis, that would reduce the impact and curtail the impact so that the damage does not become prolonged or the crisis does not become prolonged? So first thing I do is to think of how to manage the crisis situation and curtail it. The second thing that I have come to realize over the years as awareness has been raised on issues of mental health is the fact that I must and we must pay attention to what is this crisis triggering in our lives in terms of what, hey, I've just lost my dad. What kind of emotions, what kind of feelings is this triggering? Am I in shock? Am I in denial? And so on and so forth. We're talking about self-leadership. Nobody can answer those questions for you. There's some aspects of crisis that we have to deal with internally before we go out and seek help. So each time I'm faced with a challenge, whether somebody just lost a job or we just had a surgery that failed and there are complications from surgery, I keep asking myself, has this led to more anxiety? How am I feeling? So I stay in touch with my emotions and honestly staying in touch with my emotions. And the reason why I'm emphasizing honestly is because sometimes we over spiritualize things. And I've heard Christians, like from where I'm coming from in Nigeria, we always say it is well when it is not well. So if I'm going to be honest with anybody, I need to be honest with myself that I'm grieving, I'm frightened, I'm anxious, and so on. Now, why am I doing this? I'm doing this because I need to be able to ascertain the point at which I need to seek help, or I feel that a mental health crisis is looming. I had some kind of episode a few months ago when I was just overwhelmed with a lot of health challenges, with COVID and so on and so forth. And I actually cried out for help. I found myself staying in bed, just crying, locking myself in the room and so on and so forth. So because I've understood that in managing and responding to crisis, one has to be in touch with the psychological effect, the emotional effect, I called out for help because I was getting very close to my breaking point, and help came and I got stabilized again. So secondly, let's stay in touch with our emotions. Thirdly, and very important aspect of crisis management or responding to crisis for me over the years has been the decision-making process. Crisis requires a response. Something has gone wrong. I need to respond to that. And in making those responses or responding to a crisis situation, we must be informed. We must weigh all our options. My husband had a surgery and it developed into some complications. And I had to decide between moving him I had two hospitals as options. These ones were saying, bring him back. The ones that did the surgery and it went wrong in the first place were asking me to bring him back. Some people were suggesting taking him elsewhere. And I knew that when a desperate situation, we had just rushed into the hospital, I still needed to calm down in crisis, not get engulfed emotionally, and attempt to think rationally so that I don't take a decision on his behalf that worsens his situation, or perhaps I even end up losing him. And thank God, I would strongly recommend, like Miss Pitt had said earlier on, a support network. Thank God I have a support network. First, I asked the Holy Spirit, we're in emergency right now, what do? I need to take this decision within a few minutes. And I have 3 or 4 friends that I've identified over the years that are my crisis support network. When I go to them and I can't think rationally or take decisions appropriately, I've learned to trust them. I've learned to understand that when it's not okay with me, they are not okay. You have some friends and acquaintances, you can share your problems with them, but it doesn't hit them the way it hits these 3 or 4 people. So over the years, I've understood the importance of decision-making within a crisis, even though we're emotionally engulfed and it's difficult, and understood the fact that we need a support network to help us through. And the 4th area that I pay attention to is self-care. How do I stay positive? How do I stay healthy? Don't forget, I'll just cite an example. For instance, you just lost a job and you worry. And then all of a sudden you're having a stress-related illness, high blood pressure that leads to stroke and so on and so forth. So I've understood that even though the deed has been done, there's a problem, I mustn't let it get out of hand and then end up solving this problem. But hey, starting a new crisis, high blood pressure for or stroke for the rest of my life. So self-care, I pay attention to that all the time. I've understood the fact that a positive outlook always steers us in the right direction. So I resist this victim, defeatist mentality, or I don't allow fear begin to result in a mental health flare-up during the time of crisis. And this phase is usually about the battlefield of the mind. Sometimes you literally have to self-talk. So sometimes I'm actually audible and I'm saying, no, I'm not going to die. No, he's not going to die. And no, my daughter is not going to come out a vegetable when she's in study, because I really have to fight and take care of my mind and stay positive. And what has worked perfectly for me over the years has been listening to worship songs. So sometimes I can't even sleep during crisis without plugging my ears with my AirPod, with about 4 hours download of worship song from Spotify. And so those are the 4 key things. There's so many other things that I have learned through crisis over the years that I wanted to share. And then lastly, I now have what I call my own crisis cycle. Crisis cycle means I've understood that my crisis is addressed in different stages. So stage 1 is the first response. Oh my goodness, my dad just died. It means the world to me. And then there's grief, there's grief, there's grief. And it feels like, no, I don't want to wake up. I just want to sleep and never wake up from this bad dream. Then after a while, you realize it's gone 2 days, 3 days, he's actually dead and stone cold. Then I get to my stage 3, when it's like, okay, dad's gone. Gosh, I mean, that's the best parent you can ever have in the world. So how do I move out of this? Okay, maybe I should do some of those things that he believed in. Maybe I need to work in the area of education, in his memory, and so on. And so gradually, reality is sinking in. Then I move to the stage of looking forward. That, well, now it's time to stop mourning or grieving. And I say, hey, it's my dad that died, but it's not my child. Some people lost their child instead. And that was literally the process I went through when my dad died, and it was taking months for me to get out of that grief crisis. Then I accept my new normal. Hey, I'm fatherless, and so on. And so my new normal is I'm fatherless. And a very important stage in my crisis cycle, which I'd like to recommend for everybody, is the post-crisis analysis. My dad died. He died of heart failure. We were told that we need a heart transplant just before he died. But wait a minute, his dad also died of heart attack. My grandfather was watching a soccer match. He was watching football, that's what we call in Nigeria. And he was watching a soccer match. And from that soccer match, he had a heart attack and died. So what does that tell me? There is a potential crisis. There's a heart problem in the family, in my genes. And there's a potential health crisis for me if I didn't do a proper analysis of that crisis. So now I have a cardiologist. I've gone to meet a cardiologist. I have a cardiologist, and they're checking I'm supposed to have my heart checked every 6 months because of that history of my grandfather just dying from watching a match, the excitement from watching a match, and so on and so forth. So I would strongly recommend, I do that all the time, go back to the crisis and begin to get lessons learned, what has happened, what has caused this, and so on and so forth. This is pretty much my own crisis cycle that I've come up with myself. The other thing I noticed about my crisis cycle is that when it has to do with my children, I'm literally stuck in that stage 1 and 2 that's so emotional for a long time, but I cope better with financial crisis, work crisis. I can think through that and adapt and change and move forward. So I see there's some crisis that takes a toll much more on me than others. And then lastly, how we relate, in conclusion, how we relate and cope with crisis, it's very different from person to person. So please, we don't undermine how people are feeling. And it's also dependent on our capacity to face challenges. And that capacity differs. But I strongly believe, going by my experience, and I've seen how I've grown to adapt to crisis over time, that the capacity to cope with crisis can be nurtured, and we can be mentally and physically ready for crisis. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much, Bimpe. Very, very wise words. I think the cycle is something that we all can apply. I've definitely applied that during my crisis experience. I every time I see something that I can point out and be like, yeah, I remember that stage. I remember this process I had to go through. So it's very relevant. So I appreciate that. Charisa, I'm gonna give you the floor just to share some insights on this topic before we get into our question and answer period.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much for having me. It's so good to see Leslie and Ms. Bimpe. It's a pleasure to be here. And really quickly, of course, mental health is my field, is my passion, is my love. I've been, having worked in mental health with chronic illness and with people who have a terminal illness for about 14 years. I I have seen it all as far as the mental health spectrum is concerned. And one of the things that I've discovered, and I'm going to introduce a new word here that we haven't really talked about, is the difficulty that a lot of people have during a crisis, whether it's physical crises. And normally a physical crisis is going to create a mental crisis. But a mental crisis can also create a physical crisis. So there is this back and forth that happens between the two that are they're very connected. And one of the things I realized is that people have a hard or a difficult time adapting, or they call it cognitive adaptation. And it's very hard to adapt to new information with your old way of thinking or your old state of mind or your old way of doing things. And so we're in a current pandemic for the last, I think it's been 6 months now. And there's all of this information that everyone is not used to. And we're used to doing things one way, we're used to the world being one way up to 2019. And then we hear all this new information. And so in order for us to behave differently, to think differently, to act differently, and even to feel differently, we have to figure out what are we going to do with this new information. And that new information is new. So we don't even have the set of skills and schemas to put it in. Like we don't know what to do with this. And so there's, my patients, for instance, they're fine. And then one day they go for a regular checkup and the doctor says, oh, you have high blood pressure. Oh, you have diabetes. Oh, by the way, we see a tumor that may be cancerous. And so immediately they go into anxiety, depression. Then, as time goes on, PTSD happens and, there's this panic attack. It's because this new information is hitting them and they don't have the skills or the time to adapt to it. But adaptation is so important from a mental health standpoint, or from a mental standpoint, as a perspective standpoint, if we're going to create different behaviors for the changes that we're in. So I've helped a lot of people to just mentally, hey, let's relax, and you validate where people are. So you validate their feelings. People are going to be hurt. They're going to be sad. They're going to feel pain. They're going to be distraught. They are going to be depressed. There is going to be a level of stress. And we have to validate that. So as a social worker or a mental health therapist, I validate you have a right to feel the way you do. You have a right to feel sad. Yes, you have a right to be angry. You have a right to be depressed. But now that once you've dealt with that, and once you've sat with that for a little bit, we can get stuck there. What can we do to make you feel differently? Or now let's learn some new terms, or let's learn a new way of thinking. This is what it is. There's nothing we can do about it. It's a crisis beyond our control. Now, how can we help you to get to a next level? Or how can we help you to now create a different behavior towards this? So imagine me working with people in their crises for years. And then one year, I have a crisis of my own. Never been there before, never dealt with that level of pain, that level of hurt, that level of grief. And so now I'm having to even learn to apply the same adaptation skills that I was telling them to myself. How am I going to now live with this grief and this pain of losing my parents suddenly, and my uncle suddenly, and other friends suddenly, and now I have to live in a world which is me and all these plans that we had as a family, and wanting them here and they're not here, and it's just me and my brother, and now like what do we do? Like what now? And so I had to take on a certain level, even the adaptation for me, which is still a process now, of how am I going to now, with this new change and this new normal, how can I change the way I think? What kind of behavior am I going to now create so that I don't get stuck in depression, so I don't get stuck in isolation, so that I don't get stuck in your anxiety level? So I understand, as Bimpe is talking when she lost her father, like I understand that process. And it's one thing when you lose one, but then when you lose two, doesn't minimize Bimpe's experience, but it's definitely an experience that I've never experienced before. So when I look at the world, and I talk to a lot of people now who are really going through, where everybody has their idea of what's going on. Like everybody is experiencing this crisis that we are going through very differently. Everybody is at a different mental health level. And so when Leslie spoke earlier about, you don't get your mind right during the crisis, it's good to be at a certain mental health stability before going into a crisis. It's no different than, when you're going into surgery, one of the things the doctor is going to look at is what is going to be their level of recovery before we even go into the surgery. So if a person needs surgery, but starting out they're physically weak, the doctor is going to reconsider, because having a surgery will actually do greater harm than it would greater good. And so it helps us to actually, from now, especially now, and it's a pity that we're in a crisis and now we're talking about this, but these are ongoing discussions that we need to have, because we want to get ourselves to a place where we are preparing, we are preparing ourselves mentally. We are always making sure that our mental health is at a level where when crises do come and does appear out of nowhere, out of control, we are ready, we are prepared, we have the skill set, we understand, we are aware. Because sometimes just a matter of understanding. I can't do anything about it, but I understand what this feeling is. I am aware of where this is coming from. Now this is what I can do. And so when we talk about adaptation, that helps with, and when we talk about being at a certain level of mental health going into any crisis, that helps with the resilience, but it also helps with the recovery at the end of it. So we are in the middle of a crisis, and then there's going to come a moment, who knows when the entire world is going to have to get to this place of recovery. And then that recovery is going to be a whole new process that we have to go through and learn. So Bimpe went through a few things that we can do to maintain our mental health, even before a crisis and also during. And I guess as questions come in, we can add more. But I thought that it was important to talk about the adaptation and the fact that that is a difficult process, but it is an important process in mental health in any crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Charissa. I think all of our experiences really help us in helping others, right? I think it's good when it's good when we go through our personal experiences, because we are able to lend our ways of managing these different occurrences, lend our expertise to others. But I think again the topic or the reoccurring theme of today is like just education. So the more we can educate ourselves over a broad span of life, everything that we can experience, whether it's personal situations, professional situations, even spiritual situations, the more information we can give and the more understanding we can get of that information, it would allow us to apply that information when necessary in our lives. For sure. So I want to give Leslie an opportunity. Leslie, I know you spoke earlier today, but I do want you to get an opportunity to share some thoughts on this particular topic. Again, if you have any questions, anyone, just feel free to put it in the question box and we'll get to them. But I have a question I want to ask you guys, but I want to give Leslie the opportunity to say something as well.
Okay, in light of our topic in this session about how to respond to physical and mental crises, I'm going to add a third R to my message, and that's to recognize threats. So we're talking about self-governance as kingdom leaders. That's how JD got us started this morning. And due to what I see in my work as a marriage and family therapist, I recognize how addictive behaviors of all sorts are increasing during COVID shutdowns, during this crisis. Addictions can be numbing behaviors to pain. They can be results of boredom. They can be escapes from stress. And addictions can evidence in many forms. So why am I addressing this? A specific addiction that I want to address today in this forum is an addiction to pornography. Pornography use is a real threat to both individuals and the family, and access is growing with our increased access to computers and phone screens for both males and females. We're a technological society. I want you to know that pornography is a multi-billion-dollar industry that's estimated at between $6 and $11 billion. And this industry is proactive in capturing minds through invading our screens to provoke curiosity. So let me create an awareness as a kingdom community that we may not have. The average age of onset of viewing porn is age 11. Let that soak in. Viewing pornography is addictive. The physiology of it is it overstimulates the dopamine receptors in the brain. And those receptors are activated by pleasure and by novelty. And so over repeated experience to porn, our brain's dopamine receptors become flooded and they begin to prune back the receptors, which creates a craving. Repeated use of porn actually damages the structure of the brain. For the kingdom leader, the use of porn creates a snare that compromises kingdom character. So for married individuals, the use of pornography erodes the intimacy in marriage. It creates disconnects, guilt, shame, fragmenting. A real person, your spouse, can't compete with altered imagery or the novelty of new images of different bodies at the push of a button. So for those struggling, I would encourage you to revisit Dr. Munroe's book on the power of character in leadership. He would tell us to flee compromises done in the darkness. And I can hear him saying, children, put away foolishness. Manage yourself. In order to bring wholeness where we're fractured by this addiction, we need to be honest with ourselves. We need to expose the addiction to the light. We need to confess entrapment. We need to access accountability. And we need to educate ourselves on the nature of this addiction and build protective hedges. So if you are struggling with addictions to porn, I've located a resource through our trustee, David Burrows at BFM. There are leaders available to provide support and accountability for those of you seeking freedom from a porn addiction. And you can contact Mr. Keith Clinton or Mr. David Knowles at Bahamas Faith Ministry. Healthy families educate themselves about the reality of this threat. We talk to our kids and we create cyber hedges to protect our families. Single individuals can create character accountability with a trusted group of kingdom confidants. And in healthy marriages, we'll talk about how we'll handle unwanted invasion of porn. The hedges we'll set up. And for those struggling, we'll set up accountability supports for freedom and self-government. As kingdom leaders, we make a vow, a covenant with our eyes, that we will not put before us images that compromise our integrity and character. Crisis will not create an opportunity for compromising our character, but strengthening our place of leadership.
You're muted, Mr. Chairman.
My bad. Thank you, Leslie. I think you bring up a good point, especially when talking about pornography addiction. And you know, that's your point to porn is important, but there's also subtle instances where sex is sold on a regular basis, right? On the commercials we watch. The magazines that we may breeze through, or whatever the case, sex sells, and that's the world that we live in. So just to kind of piggyback off of your point, then how would you manage or cope with the view that we all live on our cell phones now? So as we scroll through social media, or as we move through as we watch television, watch our favorite shows, how do you manage even the subtle instances of, let's call it what it is, pornography, right? The appeal that these advertising giants use sex to sell their products, right? And how would you best determine that we deal with that?
We are swimming in a culture, like you said. And what I've had to do personally is, we ask the Holy Spirit. He's the one who walks beside us. And we ask him to show us what grieves him, really, what grieves the holiness of the Lord. And we have receptors inside for that too. We have that subtle kind of sick feeling. And a lot of times, the truth is we develop our hedges by trial and error. When we know we've kind of overstepped them, we get this feeling of being really contaminated and our character being compromised. And that's when we quickly repent and respond to the King and the messages that he's sending us. And we pull in our boundaries. If that means leaving the room when something's on during TV, or, not going to a movie with a friend, or even walking out to get a drink in the midst of a scene that's inappropriate, we're responsible to put the hedges on our eyes.
Right, and it takes us back to self-governance, right? The theme of this event. It really, I think it comes down to what self-governance really is all about, and it's really having that discipline to, even when we don't want to, or when we think it's not a big deal, really being conscious of what that is. I want to go to Bimpe, then I want to go to Charisa. Bimpe, you mentioned the cycle, right? And you said that going through the cycle, when you deal with personal matters, it's different to when you deal with life matters, like something professional or something. How do you get through dealing with a personal matter, and it's harder for you to go through steps 1 and 2, or cycles 1 and 2, but it's much easier when dealing with something else, because I don't think maybe there's not that big of an emotional connection, and it just creates, dealing with more personal matters, it creates a bit of uncertainty, a bit of maybe anxiousness. So how do you manage your way through it? I know you said dealing with personal matters is a bit more difficult for you. So what keys or what steps do you recommend to get through those particular processes, especially in dealing with personal matters?
Right, so you just responded. It's the emotional connection, So if there's anything wrong with my husband, my children, it's tough. You understand? So it's tough. And because I have I'm very protective of my family as a person. And because in my family, I'm regarded as the strongest person, the pillar, she's the woman of God, and so on and so forth. It puts a lot of pressure on me. So when I was having my meltdown and calling for help, it took a bit for them to take me seriously, like, Mom, you just need to, take a walk, and so on and so forth. You'll be fine, until I kept calling, because I'm now aware of mental health. And I was aware that I was getting into a dark place. I hadn't been there before, and I didn't want to keep pushing that button and get into trouble. And so what I've come to realize is it's tougher, but it's doable. I have to still walk through that same process, lean on God, pray more. Automatically, I just find myself not even able to eat. I don't need to fast. If one of them has been very ill, I just lose my appetite. You understand? One had a medical condition and couldn't eat for days. I stopped eating until the doctor said she can start eating. So I decided not to eat until my daughter is able to eat, or something like that. So it's the emotional connection. And I have I've been told, an extraordinary bond with my girls and my family. But still, we walk through the process. It's just more worship songs. It gets so bad that I have to put on TBN, SBN, anything, any gospel channel. I have all the TVs on, and then the word of God in the whole room, top volume, and so on. And that just sort of lightens the burden. That's the work of worship. It just lightens the burden gradually, and then we get back to what do we need to do to get out of there. But I don't want us to undermine the importance of a support system. And that's why I'd love a world that has more empathy. So I have like a friend, one of my support system, I told her, my daughter is going in for surgery tomorrow, and she got 45 women praying until I sent a message she was out of surgery hours after. So we have to, I didn't need to ask her. I think if we can be, as leaders, as kingdom citizens, we should know how to empathize when someone's going through something. Let's try and figure out and put ourselves in their situation and see how we can help. Just like Ms. Pitt said, she had her refrigerator filled with grocery. So somebody was thinking about, what can I do to ease this stress level? You know, what can I do to help this person not, break down from this crisis and so on. If we had that kind of world where we just, without being asked, we're our brother's keeper, we would help a lot more people from slipping down that slope and having a mental health crisis or clinically diagnosed with one form of anxiety, depression, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, so it seems like you lean more to dealing with your more personal unexpected events. You lean more to your spiritual encouragements and the bond of your network. And I think that's also important. We oftentimes neglect how important our spirit line is, right? And how much encouragement it gives us to bring us through those trying times. And then you speak on, I think, underlying an undertone to what you're saying too is the education that you have, right? Because you get all of this information from your experiences or from your learning, and you're able to pull on them or be encouraged by them even when we go through our trying times. And I think this leads to my question to Charisa, where you talked about cognitive adaptation, right? And knowing or gaining new information, but maybe not really understanding how to apply that information, or changing your mindset in how to understand this information that you receive, and then applying that information to your situation. So I know that's an issue that can be a challenge to some people, especially maybe the, I don't want to say the older generation, but folks who are a bit more stuck in their ways, right? And don't want to use new, change their mindset or have a new mindset or do things, but in a new way. So what like when you deal or when you meet patients in your field, or even if you've experienced it in your personal life, how have you been able to get over this resistance to information or the use of new information?
Hi. I realize this with my patients, but I also realize this because not everybody's my patient. And so there are people who are just regular friends, even with myself. Like, one of the things that stands in the way of any mental health growth or any mental health maturity or stability is going to be denial. And so everybody denies the way they're feeling, and they deny what they're going through. They deny certain experiences. They even deny that, like, I had someone tell me, oh, I used to have that addiction before, like the addiction that Leslie mentioned. Oh, but I think I'm over that in a matter of a month. Well, we know addictions don't work that way. There's a process that addictions goes through. So my response then now is, oh, just because you haven't been interested in it 1 month, like, that doesn't mean that you're over it. It means that you're probably well on your way. But I would be very careful, because at that point, when you think you are over it and you're in this great denial, that'll be the very moment when you slip. And so I think what I like to get my patients to look at is be aware of their feelings, be aware of where they are, be aware of how of what it is that's affecting them, and then accept it. Because once you get to that level of acceptance, now we can work. Once you get to that level of awareness and recognition and acceptance, now we can create change. But it's going to be very difficult to deal with someone that's in denial and then they're also resisting. So in therapy, it takes many sessions. When you have someone who go to therapy for the first time, it takes many sessions to get them from resisting help, or resisting wanting to be there. Maybe they're being forced. Maybe they have been mandated. Maybe it may be a husband that the wife said, if you don't go to counseling, I'm divorcing you. There are all these reasons that people resist certain help, that they resist wanting to be vulnerable. There's a place of vulnerability that people don't like, because it makes them raw, but it also makes them prone to more hurt sometimes, or hearing what they don't want to hear. And so you get them to be aware and then accept. And then we can start to produce this change of Now that you are at a place where you accept it, now it's information that you have. You don't have to know how to apply it on your own, know when to get some help. So if I am to be transparent myself, so I have recently just come against what I'm going to call a giant for the first time in my life that I don't know how to deal with. I have pride myself in going through life, meeting elephants and looking at them as lunch and being able to process to by process deal with them bit by bit, bite by bite, and getting stronger, and then go through life, meet a next elephant that's even bigger, and then deal with that. And then for the first time, I'm at an elephant and a giant that I'm like, man, this looks like I don't know what to do. And so for the first time, I'm having to tell myself, I had and have the skill sets to deal with all the things I've dealt with, but I'm at a place where now I don't know how to deal with this information. I don't know how to deal with this issue. I don't know how to deal with this. Like, this one is for the first time larger than me. And so that's when I know that, number one, I have to now lean on, I can't lean on my own understanding. I truly have to lean on the understanding of the Holy Spirit. And then I also have to know when to ask for help. So a lot of people don't like to ask for help. They don't like to ask for professional help, especially from a psychological mental health standpoint, which should be looked at no differently than if you're asking going to the doctor for your physical health, or if you're going to a fitness trainer for your fitness health. All of that is the same thing, because even when you get a cold, you don't have to run to the doctor when you get a cold. You go to the pharmacy, get some medications, boom, just you treat the symptoms. The virus will eventually take its course and you'll be done. When now that cold is something else, when you now have a flu, or when you now have some kind of bacteria issue that requires antibiotics, then you now have to go the next step and get professional help. It's the same. And so sometimes we do have to recognize when a crisis, or when information, or when a issue is bigger than us. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to seek help to assist us with applying the new information, with figuring out, okay, what skills do I need to create right now? And then how do I apply that to my way of thinking so I could have a different perspective? Because my different perspective is going to give me new attitude, new responses, new behavior, and eventually new growth, which is going to create a greater recovery and a greater response.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. You know, if you meet something that you've never met before, or you meet something that you don't think or know if you can get through it, especially by yourself, it doesn't hurt to seek professional help, or the help of a good network base. You know, and I think we all have dealt with something where we had to get help, either professionally or socially or spiritually even, from our networks, and I think that really helps a lot. Bimpe, I know you deal with young individuals, young adults, quite a bit. How do you, and you know, in particular, let's talk about recent events. You know, this NSARS event that's going on, or this campaign that's going on in Nigeria. And I know a lot of kids, a lot of young adults they might have not experienced anything like this before. So this may be sort of traumatic to them, you know, and it may play on their mental health. What steps, if you guys have taken any, what steps have you put in place to ensure that the mental stability of the young adults that you deal with, that you interact with, both, you know, those that volunteer and work along with you in the organization, and then those that are a part of the organization? You know, what do you do as a leader, as a youth leader, in coping with, you know, the things that happen, or that is happening right now in Nigeria?
All right, so one of the evenings, I can't remember, maybe it was after the Lekki shooting or so, and I got, you know, messages of the young people in our network telling me, Ma, I've got to leave this country, you know. So everybody was thinking, relocate. They had, you know, lost hope. They were traumatized because they put so much energy into what they did. And my approach to reaching out to them, even my daughters were devastated, they were angry, and so on and so forth. I mean, they vented the anger at us, as adults, and so on, and everything. And I just first continue to validate and celebrate their effort. That helped a great deal. So those that have had to counsel one-on-one is to first commend them. We had something that we put up on social media, also celebrating the Nigerian youth that rose up, for peaceful process and so on. And that seems to work, because within 24 hours or so, one of those young leaders in our network who was so distraught said, "Ma, thanks for last night. I'm not leaving Nigeria anymore," because we just have to continue to celebrate their effort. You haven't got the result you were looking for, but it's a good start. Now let's see what next. So that's the reality is, it's been stalled, it's been hijacked. The good intentions they have was stalled, it was hijacked. But hey, how can we start over and do things better? What are the next steps? Like, based on what I think Charisa had said, and a couple of, and I believe previous speakers, the resilience, there's no giving up. It's just to go back and adapt, like Charisa had mentioned. What changes do we need to make to get this same end result? So the street protest, being on the street, hasn't got us that result. So what do we need to do differently? And a lot of people have been telling them, go and get your voters registration card. That would be a good thing to do differently. So wait for the next elections, vote them out. You understand? So, but you must start by validating those feelings, and it helped them a great deal when a lot of us were applauding them and encouraging them. The other thing with regards to our own programs, specifically, with the COVID pandemic and so on, is our programs were stalled because we work with underprivileged youth and they don't have access to technology. Most of them don't have access, they're underprivileged, they don't have access to technology. But in our reaching out to them, one of the things that I said, an organization contacted us, so can we do some training for young people right now? And I asked that person, is that what they need right now? And so in crisis, we really need to take our time to not to assume we know what people need. So what I've realized is that they need food. They need food. Their parents have lost their jobs. This is not the time to be advertising some leadership, 10 steps to global leadership. That's what we do, but we've had to adapt, like Charisa has said, and understood we can't talk about training this year. We only have to talk about how have you eaten, who's lost their job, whose parents have lost their job, who's been threatened right now and think they might have to drop out of school because of pandemic. We have scholarships for you. We have a listening voice and so on. So we've been giving out food stuff, which is not our core, but we had to adapt and we had to make sure that the interventions are relevant. And it's still coming from a place of empathy as a leader. You have to, if I've had lunch does not mean all those other children have had lunch. And then I just to imagine that they're cooped up in small rooms with 5, 6 siblings, out of poverty, they have maybe one room and so on and so forth. I'm envisaging that we would have to have some counseling and have to evaluate their state of mind, because young people, school is an escape. You're going to school from morning to evening to socialize, be with their friends. That's part of their mental health. I mean, that's what keeps their mental well-being and so on. But now they're stuck in houses with no electricity. They have to be there with their moms and so on and so forth. And they're watching different things going wrong. It means we're not going to be talking about leadership. We're going to be looking for counselors, evaluating their mental state, trying to find out who has derailed or whose vision, they had all these lovely goals and lofty goals, who is at risk of going in the wrong direction, or addiction or depression and so on and so forth. So it's just having empathy as leaders, understanding our role as kingdom citizens and making sure our interventions during crisis are relevant. It's not what we had planned for this year, but hey, we have to put those plans aside, till hopefully 2021, and do what's needful at this time.
Yeah, and I think I also hear a recurring theme in this conversation, and it's acceptance and adaptation, right? So we have to realize where we are, accept this reality, and adapt to this new form of living that we're in. And we've been through this as a globe before. When 9/11 hit, we had to change the way we travel. This pandemic hit, we had to change the way we socialize and the way we communicate. So I think you know, life is a cycle. The world is a cycle. We go through these different changes. And I think that even the education that we get within this crisis is preparing us, even if we know it or not, for, you know, the crises that are to come. Leslie, we have a question for you from Annette Lewis. She is asking, you know, can Leslie share her notes and what is the best place to start a family crisis plan when your children are adults? You know, how do you set that plan in motion? So, you know,
In answer to your first question, I can compress my information down into an outline with the key points. And is that okay to send that to you, Miles?
fine. We'll disseminate.
If that needs to be made available. Secondly, question about the crisis plan. Think about all of the responsibilities you carry as an individual. You know where things are located. You know what things come due each month. You know what your to-do list looks like. Now imagine you're not in the picture. And how will you prepare your family to have a knowledge of those things that you carried in your role? So what that practically looks like is, you know, you're saying with adult children, you show your kids where things are. You know, this is where I keep my files. This is where I keep my bills. This, and you have a list, like I said, that in case of emergency plan for them. And you tell them, hey, you know, this is not something pleasant to talk about, you know, but let's just talk about it and then we won't need to think about it. And if there are changes that come up, you know, then we revise the document in the in case of emergency plan. But I think first you have to do a real honest assessment of what you bring to the table in the relationship. And we also want our kids to prepare that, you know, who are your key people? If something happens to you, who do you want to parent your kids? You know, what do you want to happen with them? You know, what is your plan? Again, we don't want to talk about that, but if we do, we can get it handled and then we can execute in confidence should a crisis happen. And I want to tag one thing to Charisa too. You know, she talked about what she does and work with her clients. I'm thinking about our global audience here. Y'all are technology people, you're on screens. Here's something I want you to know from my practice. I work a lot from a biopsychosocial standpoint with my clients, which means we want to know what's happening in our bodies too. If you want to be able to better manage crisis, you want to get your sleep. Your sleep causes your immune system. In your sleep, your immune system reboots. In your sleep, your brain detoxifies from all the junk. It consolidates the learning of that day. And let me tell you, there's a link between the screens we watch at night and the quality of our sleep because of the hormone melatonin. Melatonin builds up during the day, and then it makes us sleepy at night, and we sleep. When we're watching screens, the blue light from the screen downregulates that melatonin, which makes us not easily able to fall asleep at night. So pay attention to that in your use of screens. Either use the little orange glasses that block out the blue light, or just have a screen-free time at night before you go to bed. Secondly, recognize the stressors. Bimpe talked about the stressors in our bodies. If this is your brain, you know, here's the front of your brain. This part inside of your brain is the threat center of your brain that's taking in stimuli from the crises that we're in. It's called the amygdala. When it notices anything on the horizon that's a threat, it flares and it sends a signal into your central nervous system and tells our body to shoot out adrenaline and cortisol. Now, those are helpful hormones when we need them. I remember Dr. Miles said, if you don't know the use of something, abuse is inevitable. So the use of those hormones are to cause us to, you know, strike into action in a short-term crisis. They're not meant to flow through our bodies on a steady state, which is what Bimpe talked about can affect our health, our heart. So how do we downregulate those stress hormones? We've got our sympathetic nervous system that shoots out the hormones. There's a parasympathetic nervous system that we have that ratchets that down. What I want you to understand is the key to activating that system is through connection. When we connect with the Lord and communicate, what we're going through, when we connect with one another, when we even serve someone else, it's researched that our oxytocin, which is that good hormone of well-being and connection, goes up. So I would encourage you, pay attention to your body. If you notice the signs of stressors in your body, pay attention and try to help yourself with connection, with gratitude, with serving others.
That's great. And I think self-governance starts with self-care, right? You have to take care of yourself physically, mentally, spiritually as well. So Charisa, I'm going to allow you, I know we've been going on a little over time, so I want to bring our talk to a conclusion. So I guess I want you to share some really quickly, some information or some bits of, what's the word I'm trying to do? Some encouragement, there you go, on responding to physical and mental crisis, and primarily from your standpoint as a social worker, and the things that you go through, the things that you see on an ongoing basis when dealing with physical and mental crisis. How best, what's the best, maybe the one piece of advice, good advice that you would give to someone in dealing with physical and mental crisis?
Oh my gosh, I don't know if there's such thing as one piece of advice, but I did want to go really quickly back to when I talked about knowing when it's time to seek help, and that help can be professionally, from a therapist, from a pastor, from someone who may be certified or who may just be experienced in what you're dealing with. Just getting that help, that does not make you weak. It does not make you stupid. It does not make you meek. If anything, it shows a certain level of strength and maturity. And so there's a big stigma that goes around that's around now, where people have this fear of being seen, even walking into any mental health establishment, or telling their friends that I'm seeing a therapist. I'm seeing, like, there's a stigma of, well, if you're going in there, then you're going into the crazy house, or there's something crazy wrong with you, or you have a mental health illness, which is not the case. It's just, I need help. It's no different than we as kingdom citizens. When we need help, what do? We activate kingdom, we activate heaven, we activate the Holy Spirit. We say, like, our prayer is us going to God. And so that's no different than when you need the tangible level of health. It's just help. It's just, man, I'm strong and I'm mature enough to know that I can do it on my own. And so I'm not weak. Forget what anybody else says. Me getting this help that I need is going to, at the end, make me a better person. And I think one of the things that get in the way of self-governance is self-doubt. And self-doubt is the very thing from the Garden of Eden that the enemy used to kill us and connect that and cause that disconnect between us and God. And so when this self-doubt sets into where I have low self-esteem, I'm not fit to be this person. I have sinned all my life, so I don't know what to do. I'm not valuable enough. When all of these things set in, then we start to operate in that vein of self-doubt and low self-esteem and low self-worth and low self-value. Well, all of those things are self-attacking and they're self-sabotaging. And so all of these negative self things I'm mentioning is actually the very opposite of proper self-governance. And so once we can get our self-doubt out of control with being more positive and knowing who we are, knowing what our purpose is, and understanding that even though I may be going through suffering and pain, even that is to just make me stronger and to create the character that I need to be a good leader. Once we can get our self-doubt, I don't even want to say under control, totally eradicate it, then we can operate from a level of peace. We can operate from a level of happiness. We can operate from a level of joy. We can operate from a level of, even in the midst of grief, I still have peace. I still can find joy. And that doesn't mean that there's an absence of these things, but you're able to combat them and fill them with something a lot more positive. You're able to seek help. You're able to help someone else. You're able to connect. And so one of the things that I have put into practice, even with my patients, is And I find that there are some therapists and social workers who tend to enable behaviors, or they enable a certain level of thought or enable an attitude. You can't change something that you enable. And so I tend to combat enabling with empowering. And sometimes that empowerment is making someone or encouraging someone to realize that I can do it even when they think they can't. And so that's my way of actually getting rid of their self-doubt. I can't do this. I am depressed. I don't feel like doing this. Hold on. I understand where you are, but not because you haven't done it before, or not because doing it right now doesn't feel right, doesn't mean you can't. And so I empower people to get out of their comfort zone. I've empowered my patients to do what they think they couldn't. Sometimes that's just making a phone call to the pharmacy. They call once, they got a resistance from the pharmacy on the medication, then they call me. I need your help. Well, what have you done? Well, call again. Call again and try saying this. And then they call and they follow my instructions and they got the results they wanted. And so now they feel, man, I just did that. Like I feel happier. And so they now have a level of gratitude. And then they realize, man, I really can do this. Now, if it requires some help from me, but nonetheless, I'm not going to do it for you. Because if I do it for you, I remember my parents saying to me, like my dad would say, no, you can't. Like there's nothing named can't. And I'm like, no, Dad, I can't. Do this for me. And he'd be like, no, you do it. Because if I do it for you, you'll never learn. And so I encourage them, I make them, I'm not using the word make and force, but I encourage them strongly and advise them to, you can do this, this, and this. Now, if you've done all these 10 things and then you haven't gotten anywhere, then come to me and then I will help you. But I realize that before they get to that point, like there's been a certain level of excitement and joy that they find when in the littlest thing, they have been empowered to do it. So, and sometimes we do self-enabling as well. But if we can self-empower or find yourself in a position or among people who are at a place that they can empower you, that they can lift you up, that they can sharpen you, that'll help in your mental health and your mental stability, and making sure that you are at a level of, when I don't know what to do or when I think I can, maybe I actually can. I just have to try it a different way.
Yeah, and I think that lends to being empathetic, like Bimpe was talking about earlier as well. So man, this is some good information. I think each of you pulled from a different strand of dealing with the mental and physical crisis, just from what you do as professionals. Bimpe working with young leaders and experience and the changes in young leaders that they go through as they develop as individuals, and Charisa, your patients that you deal with, and the traumatic experience it can be to get not so good news health-wise, and how to process that, how to deal with that. And then Leslie, your experience with families and dealing with all of these dynamics when it comes to parents and kids and how they relate and how they communicate and all of that. So I hope that this forum, this panel, I should say, this has really given some light to ways that each of us, in every aspect of our life, whether personal, whether professional, whether spiritual, dealing with ourselves or dealing with our friends or our family, we can pull something from each of us can pull something from this experience, and these experiences that everyone is discussing, and the advice that they're giving. So I really quickly, I want each of you, just a closing statement. 30 seconds, please, if you can. Just 30 seconds in closing, and just wrapping up this topic on dealing with mental and physical crisis. So we'll start with Bimpe.
All right, so I just want to end on a very positive note, and that's the fact that regardless of the crisis, it always ends in victory for children of God. So I go in not with a defeatist mentality. I know that I will testify whether he made it or he didn't make it. So I will testify. And then I remember, and it doesn't last forever. So that's why all those skills are important, that we develop those skills so that we shorten the duration of the crisis. We can extend the crisis if we don't respond to it appropriately. The last thing I want to mention also is that in terms of support system, I find it very gratifying when I have the opportunity to speak with people that have been through similar crises. So that helps a great deal. So if I lose a parent, I come to Miles or Charisa, what do I need to know? It helps a great deal when you have opportunity to relate with people who have gone through similar crises and pulled through. They make it easier for us to also go through that journey. So for me, crisis is always about promotion. It's about growth and development. I'm not who I am today, as mature in my very short life as I am today, if I hadn't been bitten by all manner of crises, which I now regard as my toolbox, my toolbox, my badges, and so on. So don't be downcast. You're coming out victorious, whoever is going through a crisis right now. And please, when you're out, help somebody else who's in and experiencing similar crisis. Thank you. It shouldn't be a wasted experience.
Awesome, awesome. Charisa?
Yes, and I do want to end, I cannot, to not bring this up in this session, I would be remiss, but my dad always says that crises is an opportunity. And even though crises are unwanted, uncommon, they are necessary for opportunities, and opportunities for one to find purpose, opportunities for one to be creative, opportunities for one sometimes to be a way of pruning yourself or your situation, and also just an opportunity for growth. And so sometimes we look at crises, we look at this pandemic, and we want to automatically be negative. I'm going to actually end on this point. We want to be negative and think about, man, what I've lost my job, I've lost a friend, I've lost money, I've lost my sense of worth because I don't work anymore, I can't do it, I've lost. But we actually should be grateful and thankful for what we actually still have. We still have life. We still have children. We still have home. We still have breath. We still have, there's so much that every individual has that we should be thankful for. And so it's all in perspective. We can talk and complain all day long about what we have lost, but we should be thankful for what we have.
Okay, awesome, awesome. Thank you. Leslie, I'll give you the last word. So, please.
Well, panel, I love you. You're some of my favorite women, and you too, Miles. I would say to our viewers today to remember to, in this particular crisis, allow yourself to feel the losses. They're real. And that allows us to move to a place of acceptance. And then we can acknowledge our growth. We can acknowledge our hope. So let's not get locked down in the progress, but let's continue to move forward in a time of disconnection. Let's find creative ways to connect with one another, because connection is a key in crisis. And so today was a great way to connect, and thank you for having us.
Thank you, ladies, very much. I know this panel has been very informative, and the experience that you guys have given us, I know will be unforgettable. And hopefully the principles and advice you guys have given, we all be able to apply to our lives at some point. So thank you very much. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.